Willow Creek Springs presents Healthy Living with your host, Joe Grumbine.
You'd like to share with us. And all you have to do is pick up your phone and dial 515-602-9684. And we've got Devin all the way up in Manitoba, Canada, screening our calls today. And that's one thing that makes this show different. The second thing that makes this show different is, this is a podcast that's been around for about 8 years, almost 9 years. So if you remember about 9 years ago, nobody was doing podcasts. There was a handful of them out there. Today, everybody's got a podcast. And so the thing that I really need you guys to do is to help us make this show valuable. The reason I do this show isn't because I like hearing my voice. Trust me, I hear my voice plenty. And if I could change it in and get a new one, I'd probably do that. But this is the one I have, so I'm doing the best I can with it. And the thing that you can do is let people know about the show. Participate. If you hear of an interesting story that has anything to do with freedom or personal liberties, or anything that should have to do with human rights, that's what this is all about. And so if you don't know, and you probably don't, I have another podcast that I call Healthy Living, and it's just about that. I believe that this podcast that we're doing here today matches the platform of that as well. So I'm going to do a twofer here, and I'm going to record this one, and that will become a live episode, or it'll become an episode of the other show as well. So Shannon, you're the first one to do a twofer here, and this is kind of cool. So give me a second. Let me get the record button going. And let's see. I got 25 different little things going on here at once. And why won't you let me record? Well, tell me you're not going to not let me record because it's a live. All right. Well, we've got the live. We'll pull it from that. That'll work. All right. So I have a super very special guest here today, and she's super very special for a lot of reasons, not the least or most being that she's my daughter. And but let's just take that out of the equation. Say she's just some regular old person that's not my daughter. She's somebody who believes very strongly in personal liberties and freedoms, and she's willing to put her money where her mouth is. She's made life choices that give her extra freedoms that many people aren't willing to take on or take the responsibility for. People don't necessarily realize that freedom is synonymous with responsibility. And the second you choose to take a freedom, it's now yours. And you're responsible for all of its outcomes. You're responsible for all of its consequences. And this is, I think, a big reason why a lot of people aren't interested in freedom. And just watch how people behave. If somebody gets to tell you what to do, then they're the ones responsible if something goes wrong, right? You got to blame them because you just did what you're told. Now, if you decide that you're going to take on, a cause or a liberty, and you're going to say, well, this is mine, I'm going to own it. Well, at that point, anything you do is now yours. And if it goes wrong, it's your fault and it's your responsibility. And it goes on and on from there. And I really just came to that realization just now that maybe that's why people don't want freedom, because it's too much work. Well,
right.
I'm not one of those people. And so we'll flip over to the part where Shannon is my daughter. She had to put up with a bunch of my freedom-loving activities in her childhood and her young adulthood, because it got me locked up, and it caused me to spend about 6 years in court. And she chose to support my cause, and I think she understood that my cause wasn't even about me. I was just holding it, carrying it for a while, and helped me spread my message about that. When we were going through my trial, the signs weren't just free Joe Grumbine, they were free your damn self. Because if you let him get locked up, then you might as well just lock your damn self up too. And so my grandchildren, my first two grandchildren, when they were barely walking or not even walking, were out there at courthouse supporting their grandpa. And
Very small.
it made me very proud to see your willingness to do that. And, you know, you and I don't see eye to eye on plenty of things, but I think plenty of things we do. And I think as we get older, probably more and more we do. And one of the things that you did catch out of being raised under my whimsical child rearing techniques was that some things are worth standing up for, and they're worth risking your freedom and your property, and even more than that. And so all of a sudden, let's fast forward 10 years, 12, 14 years, and I hear my wife in the middle of the night. I'm already asleep, and I hear her talking away about something that's going on. Next thing I know, I hear my grandson is in an accident and he's in the hospital, and my ears perk up a little bit more. Next thing I hear, we got a problem here. And it completely blew me away, the things that happen. So as I sort of have this big monumental lead into the story, I want you all to understand, this is not a show that's just about cannabis, and it's not just about, people who like to medicate with cannabis. It's about your fundamental freedom to choose what you decide to do, regardless of whether you like cannabis or not. I don't even care if you like cannabis, but if I like it, you should support my willingness to like it. Because the thing is, our freedoms don't come from a piece of paper. Our freedoms don't come from our government. Our freedoms don't come from luck. Our freedoms come from the fact that we were put on this earth, along with all the parts and pieces and creatures of this earth, and we have our place in this earth. And we were bestowed by our Creator some fundamental gifts that even our founding fathers recognized. And anybody who is alive must know that inside the deepest part of their heart and their soul, that, why is it that I want it? Well, because I can, because it's mine, because I have a right to it. And I believe that anything that grows on this planet, we all have an equal right to do with that thing as we see fit, as long as it's not hurting somebody else. And think about this, okay? For almost 20 years, for 15 years, we've been out on the front lines, going to courtrooms for people. And I've spent a lot of time with people that had their children taken from them, CPS involved, threats of CPS. And I've become aware of the massive power and the lack of oversight that they carry. And so many times on this show, cannabis and CPS have come into this. And I think that a lot of people think that, well, it's legal now, so that's not so much of an issue. And I wonder how many of you people that are listening to this think about basic freedoms, maybe some that you take for granted, and how maybe they're at stake. Maybe you don't have this freedom the way you think you do. Or maybe you might have to stand up for yourself in a way that you never expected. And I wonder what you'll do if you came into a situation like Shannon did. So Shannon, why don't you take us back a week or so and tell us about your experience here.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me on, and I appreciate you even asking me to share my story on your platform. But February 4th was a Sunday. Accidents always seem to happen on your day off, right? While you're out and enjoying the day. But my 13-year-old son and my 2-year-old son were outside playing, and boys being boys, my 13-year-old picked up the 2-year-old on his bike, and because they weren't wearing helmets, they crashed, right? And my 2-year-old definitely got the brunt of the injuries. He definitely needed some stitches on his forehead and had some road rash on the front center of his face. And I wasn't there when the accident happened. My husband was, and threw him in the truck on the way to the hospital. And I just so happened to pass him going home. And I asked him, "Where are you going?" I thought they were going to go grab something to eat. And he said, "Nope, Xavier hit his head. We're on the way to the hospital."
Wow.
And my first thought was, we're not going to go to the hospital. Just meet me at the urgent care.
Right.
That's normally where we like to go, just because there's not a lot of people there. It's quick and it's fast, and you're in and out, right? And we are also cash patients. And I know a lot of people are like, well, why don't you get insurance and all these kinds of things?
It's a liberty
And
choice you make.
correct. It's number one, we aren't normally sick.
Right.
We don't go to the doctor very often. My last two babies I did have at home, and insurance wouldn't cover that anyways. So
Right. When you need them, they're not there for you.
exactly. And as a cash patient, we normally, for things that we need, we get seen right away. It, whatever I need doesn't need to get approved, and I could choose to go wherever I want.
Right. Makes sense.
So we went to the urgent care and I met them in the parking lot. And my son definitely needed stitches. But the first thing that came to my head was, he was calm, number one. Number two, he was fully aware of what happened. He right away started talking to me, told me what happened. He said, Mama, I hurt on JoJo's bike. He's 2 and he's can actually speak very well. And he wasn't crying. I was concerned actually when my husband called me, because I'm like, is he okay? Because he wasn't crying or anything like that. And of course, an injury to the head always looks bad because it bleeds a lot, right?
Your heads bleed a lot. Easy.
So the urgent care told us that whoever could help us was not there. They were at lunch. So they told us to go to the emergency room at the hospital. We got there 2 minutes later, and they took us in right away, and they put us in the trauma center. The hospital is in Wildomar. It's called Inland Valley. And Inland Valley doesn't have a good reputation as it is. But it's the closest one to us. So we just figured, okay, go there. All I need is some stitches, right?
Should be simple.
Should be pretty simple, exactly. And as a cash patient, I knew that I was going to have to start advocating for my son and the treatments that I wanted for him, because I was not going to pay for everything that they tried to do. So one of the first things that I denied was x-rays to his pelvis and his his ribs. And they were like, you don't want to do that? And I said, no, he doesn't need that. I'm like, if his pelvis was broken or his ribs were broken, I would know. He would be in excruciating pain.
Exactly.
So
I don't know
no,
if you've ever hurt a rib, but it's one of the most painful things ever. And it doesn't even have to be cracked. It just bruise it and you can't move. So yeah.
Correct.
You would notice.
Yes. And so then they said, okay, well, he needs a CT scan. And I said, okay, yes, I agree with that. Please give him the CT scan. The CT scan, and mind you, when we got there, they never looked at his wound. They threw a gauze on his forehead, put him in the room. Never once again did they ever look at the wound itself.
Wow. Now let's stop for a second there, because if you know anything about wounds, and I know a thing or two about wounds because I've had a lot of them and I've taken care of most of them myself without getting stitched or anything. And if you get a laceration or a tear in your skin, the most important thing you can do is get it cleaned up and put back together as soon as possible. And then your body can do the work, and your body will literally reattach itself and say, okay, we're good to go. And literally even things like nerves being reconnected, scarring, almost nothing can totally happen. I know, because otherwise I'd just be a scarful mess right now. And so you would think medical professionals who went to medical school and had medical training, and this is what they do for a living, would go,
Mhm.
okay, this is a wound that needs to be stitched. Let's get to it now. That should be, I would think, the most important thing, but not so.
Mhm. No. Um, they definitely became very offended that I wasn't saying yes to everything that they wanted. Um, and when they came back, multiple people started coming in the room and was like, "Well, we highly suggest you do this." And I said, "Well, he doesn't need it." And
And did
they
those
was,
people
"How do you?"
identify who they
And
were?
um, I think like three different doctors came in. There were different nurses, and they would say, "Why don't you think he needs it?" And I'm like, "Because I know my son, and he's telling me his colors right now."
Right.
You know,
Not a sign of
like
major trauma.
right. And they tried to say, well, we don't know if he's really hurt because every time we try to touch him, he screams. And I'm like, well, yeah, because he doesn't know you.
Exactly.
Right.
Doing what he
So,
should be doing.
exactly. Um, so they came back with the CT scan and they confirmed that he did not have any brain bleeding, that his skull had no fractures, and they had said there is a slight it looks to be a little bit of like an enlargement in his neck, maybe from like a pulled ligament. And I said, okay, well that makes sense.
Yeah.
And in my thinking, I'm like, well, you could do that in your sleep. So
Right. Exactly. Yeah. How many of you woken up with a stiff neck? I don't know. Plenty of times. And it gets worse as you get older. I can guarantee you.
right. So I just said, okay, well, that's common sense. Um, let's stitch him up now, please. So we could go home and
Right.
rest and get out of here. Meanwhile, they're continuing to procrastinate and procrastinate. We got there at 3 p.m. And by uh, it was almost 8:30 at night. I finally figured out really kind of what was going on because I had gone out to the parking lot to nurse my baby, which my 14-year-old was watching in the car while we were dealing with all this for hours. And then I walked back inside the hospital and there's a police officer there.
Wow.
And I noticed the police officer because I had seen him somewhere before. We do a lot in the community and stuff. So right away, him and I looked at each other. I said, I know you. And he goes, I know you too. And we started
You think that would be all
chatting
right?
for just like a second. And he goes, wait, are you the mom for the kid in the room? And I said, yes. And he goes, oh, I'm supposed to talk to you. And as soon as he said that, I'm like, oh,
Oh, here we
okay.
go.
I know what's going on now.
Yeah.
So, he comes in to talk and he says, so how come you're denying like all this treatment? And they plain out said that CPS was called, and he goes, well, you know that they called CPS. And I was like, why would they do that?
So
And
again,
he
let's
said,
stop there for a second because this is something that people need to really take a minute, people, and think. Because this is the part that's really important is that we think. Child Protective Services is not a bad concept. There's a lot of really bad and stupid people. There's a lot of people that make really bad choices and decide to have kids anyways. There's a lot of people that should not be taking care of kids that have kids and they take care of them or do whatever. And there's a lot of situations where a kid, through no fault of their own, is denied their basic needs and put in harm's way, and those kids get hurt and sometimes die. And there has to be a solution that says, well, just because you have a kid doesn't mean you can hurt and cause them to die. That's not okay either. So there's someplace in between. And anybody who knows this show is not political. But let's stop for a second and let's consider what politics is. And if you think people that are on the far right side of the spectrum, they're typically about personal liberties and don't let the government get in my business. And I tend to agree with that, except for the problem with that is when you just don't want anybody keeping an eye on anything, then people and businesses take advantage of that and they cause harm in order to bring themselves benefit. And that's where the other side of the coin, the far left, which would say, well, we want communism. We want everybody to put all their stuff in a pot and then we'll dole it out and the government will oversee everything. Well, the problem with that is it doesn't work. And so if you think that you're going to turn over all of your responsibilities to some government entity and think that nothing's going to go wrong, well, just look at all the places where that's happened. So both sides have their major flaws. And I tend to consider myself more to the right of center that says, hey, sometimes there's a need to regulate some things, but that's not the answer to everything, first of all. And it should be used with caution, within an abundance of caution, because it's a huge responsibility and lives are at stake. And so if you're going to have some kind of regulations, you need to have some kind of fail-safe that says, well, let's see, number one, there shouldn't be any kind of conflict of interest involved, which we're going to get into. Number two, there should be some kind of a third-party oversight where it's real easy to find a problem and throw a flag and correct it. And number four, there needs to be, some checks and balances involved where you don't just have one person or organization that can just come in and overrule everything else in the world. And yet that's kind of what we have here right now. So let's continue on. I just want people to realize that, CPS is unfettered, unchecked, and they can do what they want without your permission. And there's not anybody to go complain to when you feel
Correct.
that you've been violated.
Correct. And right then and there, I definitely knew that without a doubt, 100%, CPS was called because they wanted to continue medically treating him for profit, really. Because I continued to say no, no, no.
Right.
They well, they had said too that they wanted him transferred out. And I said,
Out to where?
oh, you need transferred out in an ambulance? And they said, yes, in the ambulance. They wanted him to go to the children's hospital.
Jeez.
Because they wanted, they said, we don't have a pediatric doctor. And we think that needs to be stitched by a plastic surgeon. And I said, you don't have anybody here that could stitch his forehead?
Right.
Right. I'm thinking
LVN could do a stitch.
This is a trauma center.
Yeah.
Right.
Supposed to be what they do, yeah.
Yeah, you deal with trauma here, and you've gone to school for I don't know how many years and have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on your education, and you can't stitch his forehead.
Right.
None of it made sense.
Right.
Really.
And it's not next to an artery. It's not, sitting on top of your eyeball or something. It's a stitch in the middle of your head. There's not really a way to screw it up unless you just don't know how to do it.
Correct. And honestly, I said, he's a boy. I really don't care like what the stitches look like, as long as it gets done. Right. Yeah. I told him at one point, I'm like, are you guys going to stitch his head, or am I going to have to take him out of here and glue it myself?
Yeah. Yeah.
I brought him here to get cared for.
Right. The right thing to do.
Yeah, we weren't neglecting him.
Right. And you didn't wait a week to do it. You right on your way before the blood had dried. You were right there.
Correct. And they did say CPS was not called because we think you did something to your son. They were called because you're denying services.
Oh my God.
And once they came, then I knew my hands were pretty much tied. And now made us get a transfer to the next hospital. And I had told him, okay, if you want us to go to the next hospital, then I will take him there. And they go, no, you're not going to take him. We are.
Wow.
Right.
Now, is this cop still
And
there?
the cops were there, and then they brought two cops.
Of course, because you're so darn
When
dangerous.
yeah, they brought two cops when I had to sign the paperwork for him to transfer to the next hospital.
Wow.
And mind you, he went in a medical transport, you know, they contract out medical transport companies.
Mhm.
And I had already went home to pack to go to the next hospital.
Right.
The cop had to come to my house to get his car seat because they wouldn't transport him in the ambulance without his car seat.
Oh, jeez.
Yes, it was it was a mess. Meanwhile, by this time, it was already 10:30 at night.
Wow.
And on top of that, the CPS worker followed me home so that she could interview my older kids.
Oh, you're kidding me. But
No.
and this is them not even accusing you of any kind of neglect or abuse. This is just in case fishing.
Yes. Yeah. And you know, when she came to our house, she can see 100% that, you know, we're a good family.
Yeah.
Nothing's going on.
You
You
can-
know,
You can
we have
spot
very
abuse.
intelligent. You can. I have a clean house.
Exactly. There's food in the cupboard. There's not, roaches running out the doors when you come in. There's not.
I have
Nothing.
happy babies.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, my 2-year-old arrived at the next hospital at midnight. I got there at 1 in the
Still no
morning.
stitches.
Still no stitches.
And you're probably getting a little nervous by now.
So fast. I mean, we were extremely exhausted, of course.
Yeah.
And I mean, very upset that, this was even happening. Like when you go in thinking you'll be in and out, maybe a couple hours, and then, it turns to this. But, I just kept in my head, no weapon formed against me is going to prosper. Right.
Yeah. Good.
I knew that when I saw the CPS worker, first of all, they would intimidate most people. But I saw weakness. And I wasn't going to allow them to tell me what to do with my son. And I just kept fighting and fighting because he needed to go home and he needed to rest. That's really what he needed.
Yep.
So, let's just fast forward to 5 in the morning when he finally gets his stitches.
Jeez. So now we're 12 hours into it.
Yes.
It's already started to
yeah, 14 hours.
Yeah. Wow.
Yes. And then, of course he had to be sedated for the stitches, which the first hospital kept saying like, okay, we're going to order the sedation and get him stitched, but that was all a lie. Yeah. They weren't going to order anything, or they had no intention to care for him at all.
And that's one of the things that gets me to the core of my being. People think, when I talk, a lot of times people think, well, you're a little out there, dude, because you just, you think people are, don't have your best interests in mind. You don't trust the system. It's like, well, you haven't looked under the hood of the system.